All right, I just finished Avatar Season 3. This was a member request from Zeyga. If you want to request me to review something, movie or show, I try to limit it to about one anime core in length. You can just become a member. So let's get into it. Avatar Season 3, I thought was pretty good. Overall, I think the show is very good for a kid's show. I did enjoy it, but there's definitely some decisions that they made that I think they were limited in because they had to keep their target audience to, I would guess, roughly kids under like 12. I want to start with the positives. Overall, I really enjoyed the season. I thought the sort of keystone episodes were all really good. And the ones that I'm referring to mainly are the invasion that fails, Zuko and Sokka's prison break of Sumi and his dad, and then the finale. I was really glad that Sokka finally got an episode. He hasn't really had much he's able to do in this world, so he needed to come in and kind of fill in the leadership role. So I thought that was a smart choice. I was a little bit bummed about Zuko and Iroh being separated because I like their dynamic in the first 2 seasons. But story-wise, I think it makes sense. And it was good to see the completion of Zuko's arc and his interactions with all the other characters. I really enjoyed all the world building of the Fire Nation. I also actually like the episode where Azula and her friends and Zuko all go to a party and she's super awkward. I thought it was pretty funny that it made her out to be so cringy, because she is just kind of a cringy character. Like she's just a raving lunatic. I wish if they were going to try to humanize her, they had done it a little bit more, because it sort of feels like it comes out of nowhere that at the end she just snaps. I think the show, for the most part, does a pretty good job of balancing being serious and lighthearted since it's a kid's show. There's definitely times that I wish they'd been able to go a little bit heavier, but I know this is targeted for like probably 10 to 12-year-olds. You don't really have those options. Overall, this is probably the best season because it's where you get most of the payoffs. You get a lot of world building. You get introduced to things like bloodbending, which are other applications of the bending that they already do. But I definitely had some issues with it.
I'm never happy.
So let's get into that. There wasn't really any filler this season, I don't think. Maybe a couple episodes you could categorize that way. My bigger issue with the way that the story was written this season was it kind of reminded me of the Rent-A-Girlfriend manga. So if you ever read Rent-A-Girlfriend, it's terrible. When you're looking at a weekly manga, the typical length is roughly 20 pages. Sometimes a couple more, sometimes a couple less. The way that the author writes, the first like 15 pages of each chapter are just the main guy freaking out about how much he loves the main girl and how hot she is. And then the last couple pages, you'll think that it's leading to something and it baits you into the next chapter. That manga's on chapter like 330 something and they still haven't had a date yet. Spoiler. Fuck that series. The 2 episodes I'm primarily thinking of are The Painted Lady and the Ember Island Players, which is where they just go watch a play about themselves before the finale. Both of those episodes kind of touch on things that are interesting, but they don't really introduce anything new, I would say, and they don't really accomplish much. And this also kind of goes back to what I was talking about with them being limited by it being a kid's show. The Painted Lady, if this had been a more adult show, I think could have really served to teach a hard lesson. But because of the target audience age, you kind of have to have the happy endings all the time. And I think the finale suffers from this too, actually. So in The Painted Lady, she blows up a factory to end the pollution in this little village. And the people from the factory get pissed off and want to go destroy the village. And they kind of fight him and scare him off. So it's a happy ending. And this would have been a really good one and a little bit more of an adult show for them to learn a hard lesson that you can't help everybody. And sometimes trying to help actually makes things worse. But they just can't go that route here. And the Ember Island Players one is probably the better example of what I'm talking about, where 95% of the episode is just them watching a play that's really exaggerated versions of them. And we get this one little conversation between Aang and Katara about their relationship. And then Zuko has a conversation with Toph, since I said Toph last time and someone made fun of me.
I'm going to be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded.
Where he just talks about how much he regrets what he did to his uncle. But the Zuko conversation is certainly not new. And the one that Aang and Katara have is just really abbreviated and kind of just thrown in and then not brought up again until the very end. Another really cool idea that I think really suffers because it's a child show is the idea of bloodbending for the waterbenders. Because I was actually thinking to myself before this episode, man, if this show is a little bit more adult, they could have some brutal shit in here. Like the waterbenders could create water bubbles and just drown people, which would be crazy. Obviously, the earthbenders could just trap people and let them suffocate to death or starve. And then you kind of have to wonder about the same potential with the airbenders to create like an airless bubble and just suffocate people. Like there's a lot of dark shit you could do with these powers, but they can't really go that route. Because I thought the bloodbending thing was neat, but this is also another episode where A lot of it was just kind of them fucking around in this little village. And then the last 5 minutes, you get this kind of dark side of the story. And you find out this old lady's motivations and what happened to her. And about this really messed up use of waterbending. Almost like the equivalent of like dark magic for waterbending, which is a really interesting idea. And I think it could have been way more explored in a darker show, but you need to be more adult for that. I understand that this show has its target audience and it is what it is. So I wouldn't hold that against it too much. It's just one of those things that I think keeps it from being like a great overall show to just a very good kids show. The weakest points story-wise for me this season were this bounty hunter assassin guy. This is another thing that they just kind of introduce, and there's no real explanation. And I feel like it really messes with the world building. For Avatar Season 2, I mentioned how they brought in brainwashing. And like, yeah, it's cool for that little story, but that really messes with your world building. And I feel like this guy messes with your world building also. Like, why is there a guy with some weird third eye on his head that can just fire off like nukes over and over? And then he also got a really lame death. I know that Zuko did this right at the beginning when he was still wanting to win over his dad, but it does undermine his character a little bit, I think. That makes his flip much more extreme, where instead of just kind of quietly letting it go and seeing what happens, he's still firmly in the seeking approval of his dad camp. So I wasn't really a fan of that choice. Another low point for me this season was actually the backstory between Roku and Sozin. Emotionally, I can obviously see what they're going for, and I like that it's included. The logistics of how Sozin betrays the former Avatar, I just don't really understand. Because when they zoom out on this island, it looks like just a volcano, and then that's kind of it. So there's just this little village of people there. He helps them escape, but then stays behind to fight the volcano. It just seems really dumb to me. Like, yeah, I know you want to protect your home if you can, and not just abandon it. But at the same time, if you live on an island that's a volcano, you've got everyone off safely, which is at least how it looks to me. Why stay behind and not just leave? And that's what creates the opportunity for Sozin to betray him after like 2 decades. Those were like kind of the low points for me storytelling-wise. And then the finale was a bit up and down for me as well. Because the ending, you knew what it was going to be. Like I said, it's a kid's show. So you know Aang's not just going to kill him. I'm not really a huge fan of introducing some interdimensional magic that existed before bending just so we get this ass pull so that he doesn't have to kill the Fire Lord. I mean, I liked Zuko and Katara's fight. I liked Aang and the Fire Lord's fight. I just wasn't really a fan of the ending because it was building up this whole time to Aang is going to have to kill him. And obviously, as the audience, we know that he's not gonna, just because of the tone of the show. It'd be really out of place. We already had Katara go after her revenge and do kind of the same thing. This just seemed like a situation where they were like, well, shit, we want the Fire Lord to be scary, but we don't want to have Aang kill him because he's the hero. So they just threw in some crazy-ass magic to try to justify it.
Oh, well, isn't that convenient?
I also wasn't really a huge fan of the way they had Sokka, Sumi, and Toph take down like the entire Fire Nation army of blimps, where they just had their one blimp ram like all of them in a line. Another thing that was just a bit over the top for me. But overall, I enjoyed the series. I liked the story. I can definitely see why people have so much attachment to it and nostalgia for it. I really like all the characters and their distinct personalities. I like a lot of the world building. They do a lot of really creative stuff with it. Each nation really feels like it has its own personality and style and culture. All of that stuff was really good. I would love to see an alternate version of this series where it's made for adults, though, and they can kind of go with some of those darker decisions. My only other criticism of the finale would probably be that they should have had one more episode to kind of tie up all the loose ends. Aang and Katara get their kiss and happy ending, but we don't really see what everyone goes on to do with their lives, and everyone's just kind of there. And we know that they're about to be in the rebuilding stages. I'm a little bit partial to flash forwards of seeing where your characters end up with their lives. Like, I couldn't even guess what would happen to Toph. I assumed Sokka would just go back to the Water Tribe. I imagine Aang and Katara would get married and just go live in one of the air temples or something. I would have liked to have seen Zuko find his mom and kind of answer those questions. So definitely some open ends there. I'm not sure if you get answers in the chorus show or they did like novel adaptations or something. But it would have been nice for those things to be included, especially when you consider how many episodes of this season were kind of padded out. The relationship between Aang and Katara in the live action is going to be butchered for sure, if it exists at all. Especially scenes like the one where she says that she's confused and he kisses her anyway. There is no chance that's in the Netflix version. I don't know what they're going to do about Zuko and Mai. I'm assuming Sokka and Sumi will be included, because it's kind of already begun that for the live action, maybe because they're a little bit older. It's really hard for me to imagine that the live action does any justice to the series at all. Some things are just better left alone, and I think by the time it's all said and done, this is going to be one of them. But I'm going to leave it here for this one. If you've seen the show, let me know what you think. I try to respond to all the comments that aren't just insults. I stream on Sundays at noon if you're interested. I just kind of hang out and talk to chat, ramble about whatever I've watched recently. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.